With Photon, you can't instantiate a prefab simply like you would Unity, where you pass in the game object reference. You have to actually instantiate by using the game object name and the path that it is inside your resources folder. This is not really ideal, given that you could easily make a typo and that would prevent your object from instantiating. If you change the path of your object, you have to go and update all of the strings as well. And there's just a number of reasons that this is inconvenient. So what I'm going to actually do is make a script which will automatically build the paths for us, and then we can try to instantiate normally by passing in the prefab or game object reference, and the script will pull the path from our stored paths. To get started on that, I need to make a class which will hold the game object reference and the path which it resides. So I'm going to make a new script. I'll just go ahead and drop it into my managers folder. I'm going to call it networked prefab. And this is probably only going to be used under the master manager, so I'm just going to make a new folder. I'm going to call it master manager. And I'm going to drag these two scripts in, the master manager and the network prefab. Normally, you'd probably put this code under a network manager or something network specific, but for simplicity's sake and to save time, I'm just going to dump it in the master manager. So I have my network prefab open. I don't need the mono behavior, and I definitely don't need start or update. I do, however, need a public game object, and it will be called prefab. And I need a public string, which will be called path. For some reason, IntelliSense isn't recognizing this as a type. I have a suspicion I'm going to have to do something about that, but for now I'm going to ignore it. So I'm going to make a constructor. So public networked prefab, and it's going to take a game object and a string as well. And then I'm going to set prefab to obj, and then path to path, the lowercase variant. Now I'm going to go into my master manager, and then I'm going to populate a list with the networked prefabs. Now I'm going to make a static public method. I'm going to call it network instantiate. And it's just going to take a game object, a position, as well a rotation. And actually, I'm going to make this return the game object that is instantiated. For now, I'm just going to do return null. So now I'm going to make a private list of network prefab type. I'm going to call it underscore networked prefabs, and I'm going to instantiate it as a, or rather create it as a new list for network prefabs. Then I'm going to do a for each loop for each networked prefab, and I'm just going to call it entry within instance.underscore network prefabs. And here's where I'm going to check for the object to make sure it matches up with the prefab variable right here. And if it does, that's where I will do my instantiation, set the position and rotation, and then return the object. So I'll do if network prefab.prefab equals obj photon network. I have to add the namespace. Done instantiate networked prefab dot path, and then I can just pass in the position and of course the rotation, and I'm going to leave the byte group to 0 and the optional data to null as well. And I want to return the object, so I'm just going to do game object result equals, and then I will do return result. So now I need to populate the network prefabs. So I'm going to go down, private static void, and I'll call it, I just call it populate network prefabs. And then I'm going to add a runtime initialization. So runtime initialize onload method. And I'm going to do the load type before scene load. And this is going to require editor code, so I want to make sure that this only runs within the editor itself. I could add if Unity editor here, but defines are kind of hard to follow sometimes. So I'm just going to do if application.isEditor return. Actually, I'm going to do if not isEditor return. That way I don't have to wrap my entire method inside brackets. Then I'm going to do game object results. I actually need to make this an array. There we go. Equals resources dot load all. I'm going to load game object type, and the path is going to be an empty string, so it will search the entire resources folder. Now I'm going to go through my results. So simple loop. I'm going to do if results I dot get component Photon view doesn't equal null. Then I'm going to populate the network prefab list if here. Since all networked objects require a Photon view, I know that this should exist on anything I want to instantiate over the network. So now I want to probably get the path. So I'm going to do asset database, and it looks like I need to add a namespace using Unity editor dot asset path. Should be get asset path. There it is. I'm going to pass in results I, and I'm going to assign that to a string. So string path equals asset database dot get asset path. Then I'm going to do underscore network. Looks like it's not recognizing it because this is a static method, so I have to do instance dot underscore network prefabs dot add, and I need to add a new entry, and I'm going to pass in the results I because that's the object, and the path string that we just made. So a few things about this. This is only going to run if you're inside the editor. So in order to populate your network prefabs, you have to at least hit play once after you added new prefabs, which I assume you're probably going to do no matter what. Also after you move them around. If you want it to instantiate on build as well, or sorry, populate the network prefabs on build, you'll probably have to write another editor script for that. But otherwise, you can just hit play and this will run. And since this is a scriptable object, this will be serialized. And classes are serializable, dictionaries aren't. So that's why I'm using a list of the class. With that said, I just want to make sure that my network prefab is system.serializable, and it's not. So let me go ahead and add that in. Another thing is the path will not be the correct path as added. So for example, if we use the get asset path, it'll probably look something like this. When in the end, we need it to actually look like this. So we'll have to do a little magic on the string to make sure that that's right. So to do that, I'm just going to do a private string, and I'm going to call it return. Let's say return prefab path modified. This is a horrible name, but whatever. All right. So I got private string return prefab path modified, and I'm passing in the path. So where I have path equals underscore path, I'm going to actually do return prefab path modified and then wrap the variable inside that method. So let's go ahead and go down to return prefab path modified. I'm going to do int extension length equals system.io.path.get extension. I'm going to pass in path, and I'm going to do length. So this will return the extension right here, and I'm just going to get the length of it and assign that to extension length. Now I need to get the resources part and on. So I already told you that it's probably going to start with assets and then slash and then resources. So I'm going to do int start index equals path.index of, and then I'm going to do resources. I'm going to do it all lowercase actually, and then I'm going to do path dot to lower dot index of. Now, if resources cannot be found, the start index will be set to -1. If that's the case, then something went wrong. It should never happen, but we should always check. So if start index equals -1, I think I will return probably string.empty as the path. And then I'll handle that properly within the master manager. Otherwise, I'll do else return path.substring start index path.ling minus start index plus extension length. And I'm going to wrap these in brackets so that these two get added before it's removed from the path length. So what that's doing is it's basically starting the string from this point on at the beginning of the R, and it's going out the length of the string minus the length of what we cut off at the beginning and minus the length of the extension. And the extension includes the period, at least when calling path.getExtension. So I'm going to go ahead and save network prefab, then go back to master manager. So while it goes through all the prefabs until it finds the one that we're trying to instantiate, and then when it's found, it will instantiate the prefab using the path. We should add another check in there to make sure that the path is not empty. So we're going to do if network prefab.path doesn't equal string.empty, then go ahead and instantiate it and return the result. Else debug.log error, we'll say path is empty for game object name, and it will just print out the name of the prefab under the network prefab, and then return null. Alright, so I don't think I'm missing anything at this time. I'm going to go ahead and test it out. First, I need to make a networked prefab. So I don't have my resources folder yet. So I'm going to go into assets and then create folder and then call it resources. And I'm going to make another subfolder just to make sure it's working. I'm going to call it temp, just for temporary. I'm going to make a new empty object. I'll do a 3D capsule. Then I'm going to add a photon view because every network object needs a photon view. And then I'm going to drag that inside the temp folder. And I'll delete the capsule from the scene. Now let's make sure it's actually fetching these results. So I'm going to go back to the code, and under master manager where I generate my network prefabs, I'm going to go at the bottom here, and this is just for debug. I'm going to do for I through length of instance dot underscore network prefabs dot count, and I'll do Unity engine dot log. Sorry, Unity engine dot debug dot log, and I'll do instance dot underscore network prefabs I dot prefab dot name plus comma. I'm just going to copy this because I don't feel like typing all of that out again. And I'm going to do dot path. Then I'm going to save and then go back to Unity. And I'm going to go ahead and run this. So I'm going to my console, clearing it out, hitting play. Okay, so I see that it's showing capsule, resources, temp, capsule, and that's actually exactly what I wanted. So let's get on to the instantiation part. I'm going to go into my game scene. I don't think I made any changes to the rooms that's important, so I'm going to hit don't save. And then I'm going to make a new object. I'm going to call it Instantiate. And I need to make a script for this object, which will use the code we just made to instantiate that particular object. So I'm going to go into single use under my scripts, create a new script. I'm going to call it Instantiate Example. And then open it up once it compiles. So I have it open. I'm going to get rid of start and update. I'm going to add a serialized field, private game object, going to call it underscore prefab. I'm going to do private void awake. And here I will call master manager dot network instantiate. And I'm just going to pass in prefab. And for the position, I'm going to do transform.position and quaternion.identity. And you have to pass in a position and a rotation in order to instantiate over Photon. You could probably write overrides to do that however you want, but in our example, we're just going to pass them in whenever we instantiate. So let's go back to Unity after saving. Go to the instantiate object. I'm going to add my instantiate example, and I'm going to go to resources, temp, and then I'm going to drag that capsule onto the prefab. Now I'm going to go back to my rooms scene where I will hit play. Going to quickly make a room, and where I'll start the game right away. And it looks like something didn't quite work. I have a null exception, so let's see what I missed. Okay, so I'm realizing that I don't need the resources folder specified on the path, so I'm going to go take care of that real quick. So I'm going to do int additional length equals, and I believe that's 10 characters. Let me check real quick. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 plus the extra slash, which would be right there. So we got 10. So additional length is correct. So I'm going to do start index plus additional length, so it skips past the resources and the slash. And then I'm going to include that in the subtraction up here. So I'm going to do additional length plus start index plus extension length. And I'm intentionally leaving the slash off because the slash might be this way or might be that way depending on the platform. One other important thing I neglected to do is clear out the networked prefabs list whenever I generate a new list. Since this is serialized, it would just continue to add on to it more and more. So before I generate the list down here under populate network prefabs, I'm going to do instance dot underscore network prefabs dot clear. Now I'm going to head back to Unity and give this a try again. Awesome, there's our capsule. So now we know it's working and it's going over the network. Now the question is, will this work in a build? So I'm going to go back to my master manager, and where I have network prefabs, I'm just going to add serialized field so that you can see what's in there. I'm going to go back to Unity editor, and I'm going to go to my scriptable objects master manager. And you can see that there's one element and it has the capsule as well as the path. So this indicates that it is indeed stored on our scriptable object, and it should work in a build. So let me go test that out now. Alright, so I just tried to build and it failed. It turns out that I made a pretty new mistake. So I said I didn't want this code to run unless I'm in the editor, this part specifically, when in reality I don't want this code included at all unless I'm in the editor. So in order to prevent that, I do have to use defines. So I'm going to get rid of this line where I check application.isEditor. I'm going to use if Unity editor. So if I'm in the editor, it will run this code. And put end if here at the bottom. And I don't need the debug print anymore, so I'm just going to get rid of it. And I'm going to go up to the very top where I declare using Unity editor, and I'm going to do the same thing and wrap that in the if Unity editor tags. And then I'm going to go back to Unity. So I'm going to go to File, Build and Run. And don't forget, you have to hit play in order for that code to initialize. So anytime you make changes to your prefabs, not necessarily changes to what's inside them, but to their path or what's added to the resources folder, you have to hit play at least once in order for that to serialize. Now, if you wrote an editor script so that it ran that code on build as well, you would probably be fine. So I have my build open, and then I'm going to hit play. going to make a quick run, hit start game, and it looks like the capsule is there in the build as well. So now we don't have to worry about passing in strings and messing up what we type. We can just simply drag in resources, or rather drag in actual objects like you would normally with a prefab, and then you can just call your custom instantiate method and it will work. I'm not going to keep this around, so I'm going to get rid of my instantiate game object as well the prefab that we just made. I'm going to keep the resources folder here though because I'll be using it later.